Hello everyone and welcome to our first regional webinar on edge computing. Today we'll be presenting the work that we've conducted over the last 2 years on edge computing, focusing on the opportunity for telecoms operators in Asia mainly, and how how they're partnering with the hyperscale cloud providers and other other kind of options that they're looking at. Before we start, I'd like to thank our sponsors Red Hat and specifically Michael for joining us today, and you'll be hearing from him during the panel session. In terms of the agenda today, if we just skip to the next slide, so I'll just run through a bit of an introduction on edge computing and some housekeeping for those who haven't joined our previous webinars. Then my colleagues Michelle and Yesmean will be conducting a presentation on some of those findings I mentioned, and then we'll have about 30 minutes to run the panel with some great panelists from Red Hat, Michael, Dharma from Telcoms, and Kim from Telstra. But I'll let them introduce themselves when we get to that a little bit later on. So just to go through some housekeeping, if you haven't joined our webinars before or are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar platform, yeah, as I suppose you'd expect, you're in listen-only mode, so we can't hear you. If you do have anything you'd like to ask us, there is a questions box. So you should have a box in the toolbar that says questions, and you can type in any questions for the panel there. If you have any challenges around the audio or the visual side of things, anything around logistics, then put it in the chat, and my colleague Jonathan should be able to help you. The other thing is that you will get the slides in the next few days after this session, as well as the recording for those who weren't able to make it. If you'd like to share that with a colleague, for example, we'll also be sharing a kind of a document with the answers to the Q&A probably next week as well. So you'll have that to hand, especially if we don't get around to answering your question. That's a good way to see the answers from the panelists. And then, yeah, as always, always good to tweet us on social media and to promote this webinar if you enjoy it. So just to reiterate the agenda, I think that's on the next slide coming up. I'll do a short introduction just so we're all on the same page around the definition of edge computing. Yasmin and Michelle will take us through some findings from a survey and some interviews we've been running in the last year or so. And then our partners from Red Hat, Telcoms, and Telstra will be joining me for the panel, which I'll be moderating. Just to kick things off, as I said, with a bit of a definitional view on edge computing. I think some who have joined our edge webinars in the past may be familiar with this slide. So we like to think about the benefits of edge computing as a sweet spot combining benefits of local computing, and that's computing on the device itself or sort of using traditional on-premise compute equipment, and also cloud computing. So really the reason why you use edge is you need some benefits from each side. So on the local computing side, the reason why you keep applications on the device itself, or sometimes at least on premises in more traditional types of equipment, is because of low latency and reliability. So we see that a lot in the industrial space. Manufacturers are unable to have the control of their manufacturing equipment in a cloud because it's mission critical and there's too much of a risk in doing so, and they need that latency to be extremely low. The other one is reducing backhaul. So as data grows and there's more data for IoT or video analytics, there is a cost benefit and also a reduced risk benefit of not hauling all that data to a cloud and back. And then the last thing, which is becoming increasingly a challenge for enterprises in terms of managing the data, is complying with data sovereignty laws, which can be very local. We've seen, for example, in the United States that the data sovereignty can be at the state level, and that's challenging for enterprises to overcome, and that's where edge computing can potentially play a role in helping them there. But there's also corporate security and enterprises being very protective of their IP and what they're producing, and therefore they sometimes like to keep that very local, that data local as well. Then on the other hand, you have cloud computing, and I guess some of the benefits that have come with cloud computing is the flexibility because it runs on standard hardware and software. You're able to move applications across different clouds relatively easily. And you can also be flexible in terms of scaling up and down the workload capacity that you need. Also keeps devices light because you don't need to compute on the end device as much. The application can be mobile, it can be accessed everywhere. And there's that level of resilience that sometimes you're unable to achieve when the application or the software is run or processed on the end device as well. So really Edge is bringing both these sides of the equation together, and you'll see in some of the use cases that we talk about later that they will often need both low latency, but also the ability to be flexible too. We talk about telco edge computing quite a bit, so we'll just go on to that slide. Perfect. So there's this is the spectrum of, different locations, let's say, where computing can live. And I was talking about local computing being maybe the end device or the enterprise. Now, thanks to the innovation happening in the telecom space, we have network edge computing as well, which can be, probably in any site, in any network facility, essentially. I think now most of the action is happening in, say, the transport, the aggregation points. But that will potentially go deeper in the network, even into the access network in the next few years. And we're definitely seeing it with things like Open RAN, creating edge computing very deep in the access network. So within telco edge computing, there are these two main forms: on-premises edge, so telcos providing compute at the enterprise premises, and then the network edge providing compute capabilities within their network facilities. The other dimension that we tend to look at for telco edge computing is the application itself. And there's two main types here. So you have network functions, first of all, which are the internal applications in a way that telcos use to run the network. And this is not just the mobile network. We're seeing a lot of innovation around fixed network convergence that's accelerated through 5G, and also even in the cable space through the virtualization of core network functions such as CMTS. That's more on the network edge side. On-premise, we are seeing private LTE networks. They are being run at the on-premises edge, but also SD-WAN and traditional enterprise networking services. They are network functions that that run on-premises. And then I think a lot of the discussion today is going to be about third-party enterprise applications, and that's where we as STL have done quite a bit of work. And there are various applications. Some of them are more suited to being processed at the on-prem edge, and then some of them more at the network edge. And so we'll be referring to these terms, I think, in Michelle and Yasmean's presentation. So that's just a quick definition, but I'll hand over to my esteemed colleague. So Yasmean is a senior consultant at STL Partners, and she runs our telco cloud practice. It brings a lot of knowledge and experience, particularly on things like Open RAN and innovation in the core network, plus the other technologies that are driving that network cloud platform. And then Michelle is a consultant at STL Partners, has been responsible and working with Red Hat on some of these edge computing projects specifically. So go ahead, guys.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle, and today I'll take you through some of the key findings from an edge computing survey that we did with Red Hat earlier this year. So to give you a sense of the scope of this research, we surveyed 150 telecoms executives globally, covering the Americas, Europe, as well as Asia and EMEA markets. And the survey respondents come from a variety of business units, such as strategy, enterprise, network, and IT. And the data captures perspectives from quite a wide range of telecoms operators. So in this presentation, I'll share data points from the survey to answer questions around edge computing and the opportunity for operators and enterprises, including how operators are investing and building the edge and working with partners to support enterprise applications and their own network functions. And my colleague Yesmean will then deep dive into which edge use cases operators in Asia should focus on. So in summary, first, we found that operators in APAC are more likely to favor a converged edge infrastructure, and we'll explain what that means. And second, building edge for third-party applications over network functions is seen as important and will continue to accelerate in the next 5 years. Third, operators are already starting to use hyperscaler infrastructure for edge computing, and many of these partnerships are focused on providing third-party enterprise applications, and we'll give some examples of that. Finally, Edge will be a hybrid environment built with multiple partners, including hyperscalers, and we'll give our recommendations at the end on how operators can approach this. So in the survey, we asked operators whether they will build the same infrastructure platform to support both internal telco network functions and third-party enterprise applications. And the responses show various viewpoints on this. The majority of respondents fall into the first three categories on the chart, which is colored in blue. So if you look at the edge on the left of the chart, it starts with entirely separate. And this means that only the site is shared between telco and enterprise applications. And then quite separate is where hardware and software platforms are separate, but monitoring, assurance, and orchestration are shared. And then we defined quite converged as also sharing hardware, but with a separate virtualization layer. And only 12% of operators believe that they will fully converge hardware and software platforms between network functions and third-party applications. This has to do with different levels of maturity across the markets in edge strategies and different organizational structures as well between different operators. And if we look at this at a regional level, Asia stands out as being more supportive of a shared edge strategy relative to other regions like North America, where none of the respondents voted for the entirely converged category. In terms of how operators are planning to invest in edge, the survey shows on average about 60% of edge computing investments being used for network functions infrastructure, but a significant portion of this budget is also being allocated to third-party applications as well. And investments in third-party applications, or MEC, will continue to accelerate in the next 5 years, with APAC being one of the fastest growing markets at 13%. So one of the questions that we often hear is, to what extent should operators be working with partners, hyperscalers like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, to build their edge? And through our survey, we found that most operators are considering or already partnering with hyperscalers across different stages of the edge value chain, including infrastructure, software platforms, joint go-to-market, as well as delivery and implementation. And most of these partnerships are currently focused on monetizing edge for third-party applications, both at the CSP edge, which is 44%, or on premises at 31%. And a third of the respondents are also using hyperscaler infrastructure for private networks, which would be deployed at enterprise sites. A small portion of operators are even partnering with hyperscalers for network functions like distributed core and RAN, although these are still relatively nascent areas. So given the interest in third-party applications at the edge, it'll be interesting to see where the interest across different industries is at. So now I'll hand over to Yesmean to do a poll with you.
Sure. So before we dive into some of the findings of our research with regards to the adoption of edge and which, third-party enterprise applications, which industries, we'd like to do a live audience poll to understand where you are seeing most interest in 5G and edge computing use cases in your market. Is it in energy and extractives, which includes oil, gas, and mining? Is it in healthcare, for example, in-hospital for in-hospital patient care and monitoring? Is it in manufacturing, which could be process manufacturing, discrete, or automotive? Or is it transport logistics, which could also include seaports, warehouses, airports, etc.? Or is it another one that we have missed out and don't have space to put in the option of 5? So you should see a screen pop up where you can vote. And we are just seeing some responses come in now. We'll give everyone a few more seconds as we collect the responses, and then we'll share the results with you. So as I mentioned, what are you seeing in your local market? So now you should be able to see the results. So we have a winner here at manufacturing for 45%. We assume that most people on this webinar are primarily based sort of in the Asia side of the world, so that's quite interesting. And then we have a quarter of our respondents that answered transport logistics. interesting. And then it'd be quite interesting as well. We'll get our panelist point of view on the other, which came out at 10% actually, and then healthcare at 7%. Great. So back to the presentation. So overall in Asia, next slide, we found that the adoption for edge computing is still relatively nascent in comparison to other markets such as Europe or North America. Looking at a few key industries through our primary research, we mapped where each use case is in its level of edge adoption in developing Asian markets. So in the learning mode, we found that you have use cases such as robotics in mining and video monitoring for cargo and logistics. In exploration, we have more of the use cases such as automated or autonomous vehicles as a use case, particularly being explored by multiple different industries such as manufacturing, for example, AGVs or AMRs. We have it also in oil, gas, and mining, particularly when it comes to removing particular individuals from these hazardous environments themselves, and for example, operating those machinery remotely. In the proof of concept or pilot phase, you have use cases such as digital twins in manufacturing with the advent of IoT. And then more in the initial deployments, you have some industries such as manufacturing and oil and gas, and also in some cases for the leading industries, mining, who are exploring remote equipment monitoring, or what we call condition-based monitoring, which in some ways is an earlier manifestation of predictive maintenance that you see in the exploration phase. And some of the drivers here for edge include, as Dalia mentioned, the ultra low latency, particularly for more of the mission critical applications in hazardous or potentially dangerous environments. For example, in oil and gas, we see this being much more of an area of focus, particularly for manufacturing. You saw in the previous poll that we had a large level of interest there in 5G and edge use cases. We see manufacturing as being one of the leading verticals. And again, for some of the discussions we've had with enterprises, data privacy and sovereignty is also a really key aspect there. On the next slide, as we mentioned, edge adoption is still very nascent in many markets, including many of the developing markets. And we see 5 key factors that affect edge adoption. The first is around the connectivity rollout, where the lack of consistent coverage is still an issue in some certain markets. However, this could be seen as a potential opportunity, particularly for private cellular networks, private LTE, for example, in certain industries with clear anchor use cases. So, for example, where there are more severe consequences if the enterprise operational technology team, or what we call OT teams, aren't able to react quickly enough, for example, to minimize risk to personnel or production or the environment. Or, for example, where there is a clear need for regulatory compliance or potential heavy penalties otherwise. The second is around skill shortages. So many enterprises today have trouble recruiting the right skills or developing the right skills in-house, particularly for edge and cloud-based technologies. Thirdly, we've seen that COVID-19 has also affected the adoption of different use cases in contrasting ways. So, for example, remote operations use cases have been accelerated as a result of the pandemic, but the pandemic has also delayed the adoption for other use cases that are more seen as a nice to have. Fourthly, we found that the adoption also varies market to market depending on the competitive and the market pressures. So, our research found that in some markets, for example, like Indonesia, are less competitive in certain areas, for example, compared to Thailand. And even, for example, for large multinational companies, the adoption isn't necessarily entirely focused yet on the Asia operations in comparison to, for example, their European or North American operations, where they're trialing a lot of certain these technologies. And the final aspect, as we talked about earlier, is also regulatory uncertainty. In some markets, the need for data sovereignty has encouraged or accelerated edge adoption, whilst uncertainty in others has impeded investments. So now we want to discuss how CSPs are looking to go to market for edge applications, and as Michelle talked about, the role of the hyperscale cloud providers. Our research has found that 56% of our operator respondents see the strength of hyperscale cloud platforms as a key driver and benefit of these partnerships, closely followed by the access to partner and developer ecosystems, where they have extremely established ones. And then finally, the ability to accelerate go-to-market, which is obviously extremely important given that most telcos we've spoken to still don't know what the killer applications are going to be. We found that, particularly when we look at which hyperscaler, we found that 54% of CSPs globally consider AWS as a preferred partner for edge computing overall at the time that we did the survey. So with 52% respectively in APAC. And the reasons cited for this include the breadth and maturity of AWS's portfolio as it standard at that point. But many respondents, interesting, also flagged that this is because AWS was seen to be sort of that first mover, but that dynamics can change very quickly with other competitors catching up. So for example, we've seen Microsoft's developments there and partnerships announced there. Same with Google, a Microsoft acquisition of a firm to Metaswitch within that space, citing some of the intents that they have. When we consider the different edge domains, as Michelle mentioned earlier, our findings show that most of the activity today is focused on the third-party applications. So at the CSP edge or the on-premise edge, or particularly in the private seller network domain, and much less so in the RAN and core networks. So interestingly, of the 25% of responses who answered not yet engaged, all the respondents sit within the network teams. And so that kind of leads us to understanding, where do we see some of the drawbacks and the areas there. When we explore the drawbacks, it's interesting where how some of the respondents differed between the commercial teams and the technical teams. For the commercial teams, the primary drawbacks were around the risk of reducing overall share of revenue, the hyperscaler threat, and the risk of limiting competitive differentiation. So it's essentially around the risk of being relegated to being just the connectivity provider. However, most operators we've spoken to have said it's not a question of if they're going to partner, it's about how. Therefore, for the commercial teams, it's really about how do you partner with the hyperscalers without ceding the value. For the technical teams, yes, hyperscaler threat is top of mind, but it's also about how they enable that optionality and that flexibility and multi-cloud for enterprise customers. How do you integrate different components and manage and move distributed workloads across different clouds? Lastly, before we move to the more sort of exciting part of our, arguably exciting part of our discussion where we dive down into what others are seeing, we want to dive down into, I guess, where we see the future. We see the future as being multi-cloud, as Michelle mentioned, and therefore our primary recommendations is for CSPs to invest in much more of those ecosystem partnerships, given that we see a lot of that fluidity and that, I guess, advent and rise of different use cases across different verticals. And so, the focus here is really to invest in those ecosystem partnerships that enable you to take advantage of these opportunities quickly, and also for CSPs to focus on building those hybrid cloud capabilities to provide that optionality, not just for themselves, but also for customers. So number one, have a clear idea of what your edge strategy is, the role that you want to play. There is no right vertical or wrong vertical, but it's really about, where do you see the value that you would like to provide, not just to your customers, but also as we move to a more ecosystem-centric model, how do you provide value and, for example, that network intelligence and insights to your partners and developers? And also, how do you get there? Do you build, do you borrow, do you buy? From the enterprise perspective, for the customer perspective, they are also looking at a multi-cloud strategy and not being locked into a single cloud vendor. Therefore, there is a role for operators to enable this and engage with different types of partners to meet different customer needs with a hybrid edge cloud, multi-cloud, private public cloud, etc. And lastly, as we mentioned, it's not just about partnerships with the hyperscalers. CSPs should explore different types of ecosystem partnerships, Also with third-party application providers, industrial OEMs, device manufacturers, systems integrators that enable them to develop and deliver vertical specific applications to customers, to provide and work with your ecosystem to offer pre-tested, pre-integrated, and pre-certified end-to-end solutions to customers with leading components and provide that optionality there. And also work with partners that can then accelerate go-to-market delivery and integration with enterprise customers. And with that, I will hand it back to Dalia to kick off the panel session.
Thanks a lot, Yesmean and Michelle. Great presentation, learned a lot, and I'm sure it sparked some questions for our audience. We've already had a couple come in, but just to our audience attendees, please do send over your questions as our panel are kind of raring to answer some of these. So I think before we kind of kick off the discussion, I'd love to ask my panelists to introduce themselves more formally, as they've been waiting patiently in the background there. Perhaps Kim, or actually let's go with Michael, you're first on the slide there. Do you want to kick us off with a quick introduction, not just about your role, but a little bit about what you've been looking at in terms of edge computing in the region? Oh, sorry, Michael, you're just on mute there.
Yeah, traditional mistake.
Yeah,
thank you, Dalia. Yeah, so I'm Michael Tado, Chief Technologist Telco for Red Hat in Asia Pacific. So I'm supporting, let's say, telco sales for Red Hat in the region, and let's say Red Hat's involvement in general in this domain has been, around the open hybrid cloud, or let's say specifically with telcos, we call this the open telco cloud. So that's a journey that, in fact, telco service provider have started, especially with their mobile core. And now we see a lot of benefit, to extending this open telco cloud to the edge. The kind of let's say activity we are seeing, it's exactly how you described it. It's around the network functions themselves. There is a lot of interest right now to extend the open telco cloud to host the radio access network, to distribute the mobile core. And then I think today's discussion, is to potentially reuse exactly the same platform or hyperscaler platforms, to offer these B2B services. So we have been already involved, for example, in one telco in Japan, who is about to launch, this kind of services, for example, for video analytics at the edge. And we're also involved, for example, with fellow panelist, Telstra, in fact, with Telstra, to also enable this kind of solution throughout the region.
Great, good stuff. Lots I'd like to ask you more about later on. Dharma, if you'd like to go next.
Yes, thank you, Dalia. Hello, everyone. I'm Dharma. I'm the Senior Vice President for Enterprise Business in Telkomsel. Our today business is really about serving our enterprise customers, helping them to accelerate their digital transformations. So I think if we talk about digital transformation as a whole, the driver factors for pandemic increases, I think, a lot of intentions, and I think what it has been good to have, it's actually now a must-have. And I think it's just forcing everyone to actually transform digitally faster. And I think on the topic of edge is really important, because Indonesia is a 17,000 islands country, so we're separated by borders. So right now, everybody's aware that they need to move digital. And I think with the short time span that they have to execute their digital transformation in the initiatives, there's no way to do all of the proprietary hardware. So everybody's going to the cloud, right? And now we have edge computing. So they are looking at us and talking. You're telling us to go to the cloud, and now moving back to the edge. So I think it's a very interesting journey, where I think right now our role in the market is really to help and elaborate all the possibilities. And actually the shortest path for our customers actually to transform digitally, whether using the public cloud, the private cloud, or using the edge. And it's great to be here with Michael and Kim and with all the audience to help elaborate and discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharma. And I guess last but not least, Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Dalia, and thanks for inviting for this this event and a very important topic. Yeah, my name is Kim. I have been here in Telstra soon 3 years. Before that, several years in Telenor, working on technology strategy, 5G execution for many years now. Here at Telstra, it's really about, we categorize ourselves as one of the leading edge telcos globally, and that's not only for edge, it's also for 5G, where we have 75% of our population covered by 5G. We have introduced millimeter wave, we have SA in our core, and then we have joined a consortium with Verizon, Rogers, Vodafone, KT, called 5G Future Forum, where we really try to have a common approach to edge as well. For us, as you rightly mentioned before, and Mike, you know that, we are working on the network edge to really distribute the core in our network to ensure that we are prepared for slicing and more low latency use cases and service-defined use cases into the network. But we're definitely also working on the customer layer, where we work with partnership with Microsoft and Amazon, AWS and Azure. We have strategic partnership. We have pilot ongoing on edge in these with the customers, and we will launch them this quarter. We believe all these value of this most will come in the industry verticals, and I think you have a very interesting point before that needs to be across the company. It's in the infrastructure, but it's also in the product unit and in the commercial unit, and it's also in the sales team. We have now defined our enterprise sales team into industry verticals, and we have focused exactly on the one we had before, and we believe that value is in there, and we also believe it will be an ecosystem, and we also believe telcos need to change because we cannot protect anymore. We need to work in ecosystem. We need to change our infrastructure so we have programmable interfaces, so we are relevant partners, not only for the hyperscalers but for the entire ecosystem. Because in industry verticals, it's not only the hyperscalers and the solution layer, it's also OEM. In the mining, it's Caterpillar, it's Camacho, it's things like that. So we need to have a totally different way to approach the entire value chain to avoid us ending in a 4G narrative where we only sell the connectivity and someone else takes the application and the value out of the evolution. So we see our role is to play in that ecosystem, and we believe we have a clear part in that value chain, and we expect to capture that.
Mm-hmm. Great, good stuff. And yeah, this point about the ecosystem, I think, is something we'll want to dive into. First thing, I wanted to just reflect on some of the results that Yesmean and Michelle went through. And I think one that stood out for me was when we asked the survey respondents about their preferences of which cloud provider they want to work with. I think the Asia results were quite different to the other regions in that much more open, looks like a much more open field. There was quite a mix between, you know, those who prefer AWS, Azure, Google, Alibaba, I think IBM as well. Is that, I mean, what do you think are the drivers behind that? Why that there is that more level playing field, let's say, when it comes to cloud providers in Asia? Maybe Dharma, if you want to kick us off with that one. You mentioned the cloud adoption in Indonesia, for example. Are you seeing that it's not, you know, there's lots of cloud providers that enterprises are looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Dalia. So yeah, in Indonesia market, the cloud itself is I think within this 1 or 2 years, right? Just recently come up. We have I think a few hyperscalers already present in terms of facilities and infrastructures, and they've been aggressively going to the market. Well, the others are actually just have a plan, and the others will and the others say that it's not. So right now for hyperscalers, I think they're I think looking at the different countries, including Indonesia, they have their own go-to-market and preference. And I think right now they're, especially for the Indonesia market, it's really about moving just like what I mentioned, moving from your proprietary dedicated hardware systems into the cloud. So I think that's phase one in their strategy. And also the reason why there's a lot of hyperscalers setting up the presence in Indonesia, including the infrastructure, is because of the regulation and the data privacy. We have the we don't have like generic regulations on the individual consumer privacy. But if you go to the different sectors, which all of the enterprises are actually in, they have we actually have a very strict regulation. For example, for mining, for banking, etc. So that this actually kind of the different. I think the natural insight is that Indonesia doesn't have a strong. No, actually, it's not correct when you go to the different industries. So I think this is why. Right now, the hyperscalers are going. So the first phase is actually that one, and the second phase, and then now we're seeing that they're also moving into the edge.
Maybe I can join Dalia as well, because I think, and that has always been my view, that we need to have a multi-cloud vendor strategy and partnership strategy, and in Telstra we come from both angles, both in our infrastructure. We are using different cloud providers for our own storage and our own cloud use as well, and I think that's natural. And then we have for many years been a cloud provider to our enterprise customers as well, and we are reselling both all the classical hyperscaler cloud solution. We also have our own, and that become a hybrid cloud, as you rightly say before, and it's natural that that's moving into the edge, and I think we can definitely work with all of them on edge as well. I think where the real difference is and where you will actually pick and choose is they are also going to market directly. So it's also where they have where customers have preference to partners as well, and we want to help our customers to actually have that flexibility as well. So it's also about who's having the right application in the specific industries you're going into. So you need to have that multi partner ecosystem around you, because you cannot always just go with one into the customer. They will also have an opinion about that, because they start having an ecosystem to somehow manage as well. So for me, it's a natural thing that this is multi-cloud. It's a natural thing that will evolve and be multi-edge as well. And we will need to work with all of them to be able to be successful, at least in market where you have a market share in the enterprise as we have here in Australia. So we work with all of them, and I would say I'm confident on the edge for all of them. It's more also that they both Azure and AWS, they start working into industries as well and start working on the application layer as well. And I think that's where the demand for edge, low latency compute power will come from. So it's more picking the right industries and picking the right part of that industries, and then you need to be somehow in the version when it comes to the edge layer.
And if I can add, Kim and Dalia, right? So I think when we did our survey in Indonesia, so which hyperscalers do you want to choose? So it's multi-cloud, right? So there is no single. So for example, for a banking industry, so they have their core banking maybe on site, on-prem. They have their mobile banking application running on a certain hyperscaler, and for the other applications is running on the other hyperscaler. So I think the flexibility, and I think the quote unquote the fear of being locked in to certain extent, right? Is also a worry that they have the most natural strategy is actually to go multi-cloud. Just to add on the points from Kim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. So I guess we've been talking about multi-cloud from the enterprise perspective. We have a few questions looking at multi-cloud more from the network operator perspective, because it's also some network functions are moving to the cloud now, or there's definite interest from the hyperscalers to encourage telecoms operators to adopt cloud platforms to run, whether it's private LTE or 5G networks, and also maybe even some radio access networks and distributed core network functions as well. We have one question though from the audience saying, we see more and more CSPs moving to the public cloud. How do CSPs prevent possible lock-in in the future and be sure they remain flexible and free in choosing different options when transforming the network? So, not just you providing multi-cloud options to your customers, but you as a customer almost of cloud, how do you manage that? And what are you seeing as some of the ways in which you're doing that?
So maybe let me address, part of this question. So it's a very, it's a very valid point. There's always, when you choose a provider, a risk of a lock-in. So that's let's say, one of the value that we want to bring to to enterprises in general in Red Hat is to bring, a kind of a cloud operating system which enables you to easily move your workloads, whether they are on premises or whether they have to be hosted, on public clouds in centralized data centers, or even on public clouds at the edge. Okay. So what we see, our vision at Red Hat, we have built over the last 20 years, we have built Linux as, one of the dominant, operating system for the data center, which is now widely accepted, especially in the telco industry. If you talk to any vendor today, they're developing all their networking functions, the application, I think it's mostly for Linux now. And we see the same need, for now this new cloud world. So in fact, our we have something called OpenShift, which is an application development platform based on Kubernetes and containers. And we see this, as one of the tools where you can get workload portability and, let's say, independence from the footprint. It means that if you can develop as an enterprise, you can develop, for the native, let's say, functions which are available on the public clouds. It provides a lot of benefits. However, with the big database provider before, there's a risk of too much entanglement in the specifics of that public cloud. So with a kind of, public cloud agnostic container platform that can run on any public cloud, as well as on premises, including at the edge, we kind of give the opportunity to enterprises to not have too much of a lock-in in any specific public cloud. So that's one of the, let's say, that's one of the value proposal that Red Hat is bringing, based on containers and Kubernetes.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Just to follow on, Mike, I think Telco, we have just been so poor at having a disciplined architecture. That's why we are where we are, and we have a lot of legacy and all these things. It's also why we are slow, because we have that vertically integration down to our IT stack and into our network. And we can simply not win in this new future if we don't create a more strict architecture. And that needs to be decoupled, as Michael said. It needs to be agnostic to each layer, who is the partner, vendor, etc. So we just need to be much more disciplined when it comes to architecture. And here at Telstra, we really try to apply the agile way of working as well. And honestly, to be agile, you need a very strict architecture. Otherwise, you cannot give any autonomy to your teams that they're actually building the experience on top of network as a service and IT as a service. So I would say it's all about architecture, and that architecture needs to be decoupled, not only because of you don't get into logging, but also to minimize the blast area for resiliency, security, these kind of things. And again, also to ensure time to market, so you don't need to test the entire value chain every time you want to do a feature change in the experience you give to the customer. So it's all about architecture and discipline in architecture to ensure you are not in login, and you should definitely have a multi-cloud approach to your own infrastructure. And that's the same our customers, they actually demand from the solution they buy from us, and they need, actually, we have a lot of experience here at Telco, and that is actually an experience we can help our customers to provide when they are moving their physical application to the cloud.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, whether it's an enterprise or a network operator, I mean, I think in theory it sounds great to decouple the value chain and to go multi-cloud. But do you see any challenges either for your enterprise customers or yourselves in doing that?
Yeah, that I think that's a huge challenge because that's actually changing the heritage of us as a telco, because we have been used to actually have vertical point integration that go for our IT system. That's point-to-point integration. We create all the intelligence into the core IT instead of abstracting that from the core IT. That's the same with the network. We need to have network as a service where we don't put all the intelligence into a core of the network, because then it's impossible for us to actually keep iterating and keep creating better experiences. So it's all about us applying the hyperscalers view at architecture, software, and not the other way around. And I think then the last thing is we should not protect. We should use that hyperscalers, speed, growth, to actually change faster. And I actually see that the whole COVID situation that have accelerated that digital transformation for all the industries we are supporting, because everything is now digital. That no matter if it's retail, if it's mining, whatever it is, mining, that's because they can't get workforce to Australia. They need to automate and these things. So it's just going faster, and we need to apply that, and we need to, the hyperscalers, to use us as a telco to transform and change faster. And then we need to apply their perspective on architecture, both when it comes to discipline, but also the openness. We need to put that request back to them, because they were the one pushing us away from have a vertical integrated architecture together with our equipment providers. Now we have the same expectation of them to not lock us in vertically integrated systems. So we have learned that from them, and now that's of course the same things that apply for them when they are a partner with us, both in the network layer but also out to our customers.
Yeah. So in respect to that, right? So from our point of view, telcos, we have basically 3 types of applications, right? So, and then we have to decide on what is the infrastructure is that we are going to establish or going to develop. So we have the first one is the your typical network and IT core systems, right? So we have now standards going using NFV, so network network function virtualizations, right? And capability for SDNs. Second one, we have right now telcos also we're developing digital application for consumers, right? This is non-telco, but it's really complementing to our telco offering. And the third one, this is a big part of it is myself is how do we provide application for our enterprises, whether it's third party or is it telecom sales applications. So I think it's the same like what Kim mentioned, like your question, Dalia. So how do we decouple all of that? So I think the ideal is that we basically all the resources will be set in modular, and we will have an API to integrate and to get the needed resources on time, on demand. So that would be actually the best offering or the best state that we want to have. And I think there is a road going there in the telecom cell itself. We are actually moving toward there. And I think the challenge is really about implementing it and then seeing the right triggers actually to move forward towards that one. And I think the application provider itself, for example, if this is network functions, the likes of Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, etc., they also need to go to the standard, right, into the NFV functions itself, and the ability to provide SDN capabilities. The same like our enterprises, for example, oil and gas, they have DCS, digital control system, fire and alarm system, CCTV surveillance systems, where they actually have on-prem proprietary hardware. I used to work for Honeywell before. I spent a good 5 years in oil and gas, upstream and midstream. It's also terrible, right? Because it takes you about 6 to 9 months from a PO to delivery to install a DCS system, right? With the common edge infrastructure, also with the network, the SDN capability from telcos. Actually, that would make the job delivered much faster. So it's really about there's no silver bullets. You really need to iron out one of the different based on the application that the customer is, including us in telcos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess, Dharma, you started to hint at this, but we have a couple of questions on the telecoms operator's role in these kind of new edge enterprise services. One is on, the fact that there's going to be an ecosystem play. So what's the role of the telecoms operator, and who is going to manage that ecosystem? Operator, hyperscaler, application provider, SI, the different layers in the stack, and who's able to provide a managed service and visibility. That's one question we've received. Another one is a little bit different, but about what's the role of the operator, telecoms operator, vis-a-vis the hyperscaler when it comes to collaboration and how you can maintain some kind of dominance or control. So yeah, I don't know, maybe Michael, if you have any views on that, what you're seeing as a telecoms operator's role. I know you mentioned that example in Japan on the video analytics kind of service they're taking. So what are you seeing there?
Well, I think, if telco service provider, they want to maintain control, and get, I think a lot of target for them is to get a bigger share of the pie. They have to develop, nurture, their own ecosystem and kind of control it. Of course, there will be, bigger ecosystems, etc. But, I would say it's up to the telco service provider. And this goes back to what Kim said. You cannot go, just go to see one provider which will give you everything, because then, you don't maintain your independence. So I think to really keep control, you need to nurture your ecosystem, develop it. And then, yeah, maybe you don't have all the capabilities, in-house to develop these kind of solutions. But for that, you can have, system integrators, who can help you build and implement. But I would say overall, it should be, the telco service provider maybe have to become more active and have an active role, in developing this kind of ecosystem, depending on depending on their customers and the segmentation.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And do you see that there is a scenario where you have a telecoms operator lead the relationship with the customer, lead the solution, but that the SI or the systems integrator is more like a partner in that consortium? Because I think generally a lot of the time the SI leads that solution. So just interested to see if you're seeing those examples already.
No, not yet. So the example I mentioned, in fact, it's a fixed service provider in Japan. So they are using, and it's interesting, it's a fixed use case. So they're using the central offices throughout the country, and they're putting a video analytics solution, and they have chosen the partner, and they're offering the service, as a direct service to their enterprise customer. But there can be other models where, in fact, the telco service provider is, depending, is offering cloud computing services as well. And whether with hyperscaler or not with hyperscaler, so that's going to depend. But
okay.
Also, coming back to the to the issue of maintaining, let's say, control and independence. Again, this goes back to what Kim said about the architecture. Is to build an architecture where you're not too much reliant, on one player in the layer. For example, the hyperscaler at the edge. If you are too reliant on just one hyperscaler, you're going to have a problem of independence.
It's a very good question.
Hi, Dalia, I'm back. Sorry. Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
No, I think this is the core of the whole value of 5G and these use cases, right? Because as we mentioned before, the value will be in these industries. Honestly, I joined Telstra also because Telstra have what is called Telstra Purple, and that's Australia's biggest professional service organization and managed service organization. And I knew, based on the 2-3 years I've looked at these opportunities and these use cases, that you will need a professional service organization to help these physical industries to go through this transformation. So I think that's a big advantage. And I think if you don't have that yourself, then you probably need to have partners like SIs to help these companies doing this. If you take industry verticals and why it's so valuable for telcos to play in that, if you go down to the macro layer, the macro network, then we will work with our existing partners like Ericsson. In our case, that's Ericsson. But on the private network, it could be, again, multi-vendor there. You could have Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, Huawei, etc. on the private network layer. Then you come up to the cloud there, you will definitely work with the hyperscalers. You'll come to the edge, also the hyperscalers, and you need to work with all of them. Then you come up to the application layer, where you have your own solutions. We have our own video analytics, but we partner with Microsoft as well to create digital twin, autonomous driving, some of these things. We also work with AWS. We also work with startup and scale-ups. And then we put on top of that security, and we put the professional and managed service on top of that. So then you have somehow created the full value chain. In some industries, we will have a bigger portions of that value chain. In others, we will have a smaller, and where we more or less only provide network as a service in a B2B2X model. But in others, we are able to take a bigger part of this, and in some, the full-fledged. And we need to create an architecture where we both can expose our platforms to be consumed by others, and in others where we actually take the full package. But for each layer, we need to have a decoupled architecture. So we cannot create a vertical that is plug and play for an industry. We need to be able to have the programmable interface between the partners and between that ecosystem to be able to be a valid partner for hyperscalers, for instance. They don't want to work with a classical telco approach to stuff. And if we are trying to protect that vertical ourselves, then we lose. So there's only one way, that is to play that ecosystem. Create as much IP and as much capabilities in that ecosystem as you can. Create programmable interfaces so you can work with them. And if you don't have professional service yourself, then partner with some that have it. I think it's obvious for us that's where the value is.
Yeah, just to elaborate on Kim's point, Dalia, I think the winner or the one who's going to control is basically the one who's going able to provide, just like what I mentioned, to provide the infrastructure that is needed for the enterprises, for the customers, on demand, affordable, and real time for the different applications. So infrastructure means computing, storage, analytics, intelligence capability, and also let's not forget the network, right? So that's also an important play. So I think the big the ecosystem that we need to build is actually around that. And telco actually have a better well, in Indonesia case, we have actually a better shot of actually controlling or orchestrating the different parts of the ecosystem to provide that kind of services to our customers. I'm not sure in the other markets, but I think it's not really about the given right to control the ecosystem or to lead the ecosystem. It's really about whether you want to actually put the necessary efforts to integrate the different ecosystem itself to telcos, in this case Telecoms, actually to serve the markets. And this is not just Telecoms. So I think we in the Bridge Alliance, part of the Telecoms, part of Bridge Alliance, this is our concept and philosophy actually to make telcos more relevant into this digital world.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it sounds like there's quite a bit to do in terms of creating that programmable infrastructure, building the ecosystem, taking it to market. Say, Dharma, for you in Telkomsel, what's your priority in the next 12 months to either start or to continue that journey?
Yeah. So I think we want to start with the customers. So right now, I think we are having a lot of joint collaboration with the customers. We have for manufacturing in one of the company with which Schneider in Batam. We have with state-owned enterprises, oil and gas companies. So we want to start with the customers. We want to look at this one at how do we actually produce the most efficient economy of scales and the real benefits. Because if we start with our infrastructures and then trying to set up, then what the customers will do is actually quite difficult, and we've tried that and it fails a lot of times. So we're starting there, and of course we already kind of know where we need to invest, where we need to build out. That's why we're already trying, and then before we make it a massive and big and like a $1 billion investment, we want to test out these small use cases with the different customer verticals, and then we will know we are onto something, and that's where we're going to scale it up. Thank you.
Great. So lots on your plate the next 12 months. It sounds like that's really good. Exciting to hear though. And maybe Kim, just to wrap things up, so I know we're coming up to time. What are your priorities at Telstra to really get things to market in the next 12 months?
No, for us, it's really about keep evolving our network and it's slicing more advanced into our network, so we can do that more broadly, the isolation of services, and also create service-defined, experience-based products into our market, both in consumer, small business, and enterprise. But on the specific on it, it's really the industry verticals. To really go out in we help the customers with our professional service to do the migration from a physical environment to a cloud environment, ensuring that they all get a private network if they have that need for resiliency, efficiency, and all these things, and then build edge on top of that and scale edge, but not scale edge because of it, but because we are also applying the use cases that demand that latency and that resiliency and that compute power close to the customer. So it's about scaling edge together with digital twin, video analytic, autonomous, and robotic in these physical industries. That's our focus, and we're ready to scale it together with our partners. So keep evolving that deep partnership we have with Azure and AWS, but also with EXM, Red Hat, and other partners we are using in our infrastructure. So it's all about that ecosystem, but it's about moving these physical industries to a digital future where they are more efficient, where they have more precision, where they are more sustainable, because this is another part of this. It's also to save the climate and these things coming from Scandinavia with 3 Greta Thunberg's daughters pushing on me every day here. This is really a way to help the climate and environment as well. If we can get these use cases to fly. So that's our focus.
So also on the environmental angle. Okay, so it sounds like it's a combination of building the resources and the tools to enable edge and make it scalable in the future. And then Dharma talks a lot about working with customers to do that. Michael, anything else you'd add just to wrap things up?
Yeah, no, thank you for listening. I think it's it's an exciting area. We have just touched at I think the beginning of cloud computing. It's not yet so widely adopted, in fact. And in fact, I think in the coming years, we are going to see this changing quite a lot, because I believe very much in let's say in B2B edge computing, because of the amount of data that every enterprise is going to process. Every enterprise around the world is learning how to do analytics, how to do machine learning, how to do AI. So I think it's really kind of unavoidable that this sheer amount of data in the next 10 years cannot be processed in centralized public clouds. And it is bound to happen, at the edge. And I would say it will be, up to the telco service providers, with the help suppliers like Red Hat, how this is going to unfold, and what will be their share of this business.
Great note to end on. So apologies to the questions we didn't get round to. We will, as I said, be producing a kind of a document with the answers to the Q&A. I know there were quite a few questions on, how do you make that network more programmable, and also how you work with hyperscalers a little bit more, and really the role between the two parties and making that work. So we will try and get around to them offline. Just to let everyone know, there is another edge computing webinar coming up, completely different time zone. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to make it live, but we will always share the recordings. If you would like to sign up, then we'll share the slides, and you have a link to sign up in the slides, or if you go to sclpartners.com/webinars, then you'll be able to find it there as well. Thanks a lot to my panelists, Kim, Michael, Dharma, for your time today. It's been really great hearing your views, and I think we could have talked for probably another hour, so we might need to find some time to do that later. And then also to Michelle and Yesmean for the great presentation earlier.
Thank
you.
Great.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.